of the City Council. This meeting is now called to order, and I'd like to ask our city clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, sir. Mayor Wells.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
I'm no longer deputy mayor.
You are until the end of December, sir.
Oh, I am? Oh, okay, cool. I'm here.
Thank you.
You're wild. So have at it.
Councilmember Goebel.
Present.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Here.
And Councilmember Metchel.
Here.
Thank you.
Would you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a brief moment of silence? I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United
States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I'd like to remind our citizens they can submit their questions for the item on today's agenda. I encourage that comments be submitted at this time. Comments will be accepted up to the conclusion of the vote of this item. Comments may be submitted through the City of El Cajon's website. That's cityofElCajon.us. Under Agendas and Minutes, go to the video streaming and you'll see a button to submit your comments. That's cityofElCajon.us. We called a special meeting to discuss emergency allocation of the Community Development Block Grant CARES Act funds. And I will ask our staff to tell us all about this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm going to share screen really fast. It shouldn't be that hard to find. I don't have that many documents open. It's here. Here we go. All right, can the council see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So the purpose of today's agenda is to preliminarily consider how to allocate the city's CDBG CV3 funds, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. As a reminder, the council has been allocated 2 rounds of these monies, and these are what are called Community Development Block Grant funds, and they are additional funds given to the city by way of the Federal CARES Act. The first allocation was a little over $800,000. This kind of shows the council and the public how those funds were allocated by the city council. So there was really 3 programs that the council was focusing on: a rental mortgage and utility assistance program. There's a little bit of money left over in that fund. Motel voucher program, there's no money left over in that fund. And then the emergency shelter program, which is paying for some additional beds at ECTLC. And there's a little bit of money left there too. So in all, there's about $250,000 left. We are actually shifting some of the money in the utility mortgage and rental assistance programs from some of our providers. And there's 4 different vendors that have been helping with this, but we're shifting some money from one to Home Start, who has been able to get the money out on the street a little more effectively. Through the expenditure of a little over $500,000, we've been able to help as a city 621 households. Pretty impressive. And the majority of those have come through emergency shelter housing. The city received notice in October earlier this year that it was due another $1 million of this CDBG funds, and that second round is referred to as CDBG CV3, and that's what we're really talking about today. Back in October, the City Council allocated $100,000 more to the rental mortgage and utility assistance program to augment that program, and allocated another $100,000 to the motel voucher program. So those monies are currently being spent in those 2 different programs. We're spending that in the motel voucher program. We haven't spent any in the mortgage rental assistance program until the remainder of those funds are spent from the first round. Once those are spent, then we'll focus on the second round. So after the $200,000 have been allocated, we're left with about $800,000 that the council at some point needs to consider how to allocate. The way you do that as a elected body is through a public hearing. And as the staff report indicates, today's meeting is not a notice public hearing that meets the HUD requirements. However, we thought there could be some value in at least getting some general direction from the council today that would help us prepare for a public hearing coming up the first council meeting in January. What we wanted to talk about today is an idea that staff was approached by Councilmember Goebel. And the idea came about looking at our data. If you look at our infection data, it's pretty clear that the city of El Cajon, as well as Lakeside, Spring Valley, National City, we all have pretty high infection rates. And I think there's a couple similarities between those communities, and a lot of it has to do with the type of housing that a lot of our communities have. A little bit more density in sort of our core multi-generational families living together, or several different families living together just because of the affordability of housing in San Diego County. We also know that we have a lot of residents in our community that don't have the luxury of working from home or telecommuting, that they are required to go to types of jobs where they have greater risk of exposure. So just the nature of our demographics results in that. And if you look at just county-wide, those demographics play out time and time again, regardless of what community. But because our community has a really high percentage of our citizens are deemed low income, we are going to be more susceptible to that. So the idea of here we have a community, or we have neighborhoods within the city of El Cajon that have higher density, many people living in smaller apartment complexes. There is some value in thinking about how to give them some additional protection. And so one way to give them protection would be to give those families or those households an air filtration or air purification system, which, along with other types of wearing masks and sanitation, can help curb the spread of infection throughout the city. And here's an example of what one of those looks like. So the idea would be we would help combat or mitigate some of the factors that we don't control with something that we can control. If the council wanted to move forward in this direction, we would recommend that this start out as a pilot program. We don't know how effective this program would be. At least staff is not confident that there's measurable prior projects that have shown that this works. So we would be on the cutting edge of utilizing these funds. So we would recommend referring to it as a pilot program. I should point out that because of the types of funds these are, they can only be allocated to low-income individuals that meet the HUD requirements for low-income households. And we would recommend, as a starting point, if the council wanted to move in this direction, that we would allocate $50,000 toward this project. We would rely on Home Start to administer the program. And we think that with the $50,000, as well as using a third-party vendor to help administer, we could provide up to about 95 of these types of units throughout the community. Staff has identified several of the guidelines that are required by HUD, but we also listed a series of questions that if the council wanted to move forward with this, I think staff needs some additional details, some additional information to help us present a more formal program to the city council in January. So I guess here's what the council is looking for, or what staff's looking for from the council in terms of feedback. One is, should the city implement this pilot program? Two, if so, how much is the $50,000 adequate? Should the city focus on households that have COVID-19 or are pre-COVID households? And the staff report made the argument that for us, maybe there's some value in not focusing on COVID households, because by the time a household has COVID, it's likely that many people have been exposed to that. So maybe there's some value in focusing on households that haven't had COVID, but now we're getting into some HIPAA regulations about who has and who doesn't have COVID. So there are some issues related to that, but we'd like to hear from council feedback on that question. There is some upside and downside of thinking about a program that would have multiple sizes of systems. The upside is we get the right system for the house that is needed the most, would have the most value. But at the same time, it does add a lot of procurement process, and at the end of the day, actually starts diminishing the amount of units that can be purchased, because more money will be spent on admin. The other question is, should we measure the success of the program, and if so, how? And if so and how, we know how, who should do that. And if it's Home Start, we probably need to provide them some additional admin money to help with that process. And then the last thing is there a way to limit this to household size, to apartments only, to sort of a proof of overcrowding? Again, complicated, and maybe more complicated than it needs to be, but we wanted to throw those things up, because these are some things that we've been thinking through as we've been brainstorming on this project, that we would like some council input if this is something the council wants to pursue. And then lastly, just other feedback that we haven't thought about, or even other programs that the staff hasn't thought about. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn the time back over to the City Council. Staff can answer any questions about our research to date. Otherwise, we're looking forward to getting some feedback on your thoughts. And Mr. Goebel, or Mr. Mayor, you may want to let Mr. Goebel elaborate a little bit more on the project itself.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Steve, why don't you take that now?
Okay. The idea kind of came from, as I'm watching the data, El Cajon and National City are kind of going back and forth for the first and second highest rate of COVID among the 18 cities in the county. First or second, we're tied with National City. And that's like 5,000 cases. 5% of El Cajon is already tested positive for COVID. That's really high. The county rate's only 3.3%. So that certainly is, there's a sense of urgency. And I began to think, well, why El Cajon? Why National City? And certainly, as Graham is concentrated or has reported, I think we do have some low-income situations in these two cities in common. And the keepers of the data, however, are not telling us stats for COVID by census tract, so we could know for sure if low-income areas are disproportionately higher than not. We don't get that data. But what we do know from the county data, the first 2 weeks of December, those who tested positive for COVID reported 39% of them said, well, another member of my household had it. I was exposed to them. 39% of the people who tested positive the first 2 weeks of December said 39% of them said they were around somebody else in the house who tested positive. So now I'm thinking, okay, we've got this density on the valley floor. We know the 92020 zip code is one of the highest. So we've got density, we've got household infection, we've got low income. In a high density situation, there's really no way to isolate like you can in a 2,800 square foot home or a 2,000 square foot home. And that got me thinking further, what if we were able to clean the air to help as another tool? Again, the health advisors did not support that idea because they said we don't want people to get a false sense of security And so I'm disappointed that they don't include that as a recommendation, especially with the number of cases being caught from their household member. What is there to lose? Even the EPA says, when used along with other best practices recommended by CDC and others, filtration can be a part of a plan to reduce the potential for airborne transmission of COVID-19 indoors. That's the federal government saying this can be part of a good plan. I guess finally, I listened to 3 people who are very credible, a hospice nurse and a couple of first responders who said they're in El Cajon right now, and the calls they're responding to, especially in apartment complexes, they use the words, the infection is on fire right now. There are some complexes that have a really high infection rate because people are going to see their friends next door or their family members across the way. And this density thing really is a concern. And so I'm thinking, well, we've got this pool of money specifically for low-income people to help mitigate the impact of COVID. This seems like a very appropriate measure to help them. And it's grant money. And we still have $200,000 left from the first round for low-income people for rental assistance that's not used. And now we get another round, so certainly we've got room to use this kind of a thing. So I guess I'm saying if we believe the rate of COVID-19 is disproportionately higher in low-income households, doesn't it make sense to help them with every tool that we have available? Doesn't helping them help everybody? And so I do have some thoughts to the answers of the questions that I see on the screen, but I guess I'll stop there and let other members of the council weigh in.
Okay, Steve, we'll come back to you on that then. Council, any questions or comments?
This is
I have
Phil.
one.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
Oh, call Gary. Okay, hi, Gary.
all right. First of all, how long before these filtration machines would end up being on the street?
So if the council gave us the direction to work on this, we could have the public hearing scheduled for the 13th or the 12th of February. And I'll ask Vince to jump in if I'm getting this wrong. We think that if we ordered the machines on January 13th, it would take 4 to 5 business days to arrive. And then we would just have to get Home Start to help distribute those.
Okay.
So theoretically, easily by the end of January is easy.
Okay. And how do rest homes, convalescent homes factor in on our infection rate?
Pretty high. In fact, if you look at our outbreaks, they make up the majority of our outbreaks in the city. We think they make up between 15 and 20% of our current active cases right now. So initially, early on, they were about half of our cases. They've dropped now because infection is community spread. But yeah, up to 20% of our cases are out of skilled nursing facilities or convalescent homes.
Okay. And how long would it take for Home Start to qualify people and place them?
And that is a bit of the challenge right now. There is an application process and there's things that they have to do to meet HUD requirements. So that can take up to, well, it depends on how good the application is, right? So if someone comes in with all their paperwork, it can be over the counter, but rarely does it happen. So there's a little bit of back and forth. I think the average is around 2 weeks of getting all the paperwork and lined up to meet the HUD requirements.
So when all the dust clears, how long is it before most people actually have a machine in their home?
Well, if we were, I mean, like I said, I think before the end of January is feasible, that we could actually get machines out on the street.
Okay, thank you.
Phil?
Gary took some of my questions. So thank you, Gary. And Graham, you said in the initial report that there were no other cities that were currently implementing this type of program. Is that what I heard, or did I make that up in my head?
We haven't found any other cities that are implementing this, but at the same time, there's also cities that don't have this high concentration that we've been having either. So,
Okay. And then roughly, what's the individual cost of a air purifier?
so I think that
Do we know?
well, yeah, we do. I'll let Vince weigh in on that, but a lot of it depends on the size of the unit, right? Because the unit looks at the square footage of a house, right? So if you were to get something too small, you theoretically would have to get 2 machines, but then at the same time, there's the chance that you overbuy and get a machine that's maybe too big. So I'll let Vince weigh in on some of the research that he's come up with on the ranges.
Yeah, Council, we're looking at several different products based upon the affected area served. And there are literally hundreds of them, right? They go from 300 square feet all the way up to 1,500 square feet. And so if we just say that, we're looking at trying to serve as much of the air in a residential unit as we can. If we just say, for example, 1,500 square foot unit, we found because we're going to be ordering many of them, bulk order of them, we can get it down to around $520 total for that particular unit.
Okay.
Smaller, there are smaller units that they're all over the board. 300 square feet we can get for $175. 500 square feet, there's products that range from about $175 to $250. Again, because the efficacy of the program is really unknown, if we go forward with this, I think it would be wise from both a procurement and whether or not there's an effectiveness to this program, that I think it would be my recommendation that we would do something that covers a large area that could service an entire home. Like if we're talking about low-income families, typically those homes are smaller square feet. If we look at the product that we're looking at that serves 1,500 square feet, we'd be in the $500 range. Otherwise, we're looking at a host of different companies, different manufacturers, different ways to lay our hands on those units that may extend the time out a little bit.
Thanks, Vince. That's good info. And then I'm kind of struggling with how we measure success with this type of program, because, and maybe this is where the discussion comes in, because if we there's so many variables to determine that can contribute to if someone contracts COVID-19, and so it's very hard. In my head, it's very hard to determine and measure success with regard to, if we buy if someone gets a filtration system and they still end up getting COVID, then that false sense of security thing probably came in, and they're interacting with their family member, and that viral load is getting up there in their lungs to a certain degree. Or, if we get an air filtration system for someone before the household gets COVID, that might just be them taking the extra precautions and it adding. So it's very hard for me to determine success. And then, there's always the fear, these are lower income families. I was one of those families, and the temptation to just go on the street and sell one of these on eBay or turn a profit, there's always that temptation there, that risk of someone just selling these $500 units or more. So I don't know what success looks like with this program. So it's kind of making me hesitant.
Phil, I had some thoughts about that, and I agree with you. That's the troubling part about this. It's an interesting idea. I think it's creative and in some ways very practical. I think the hard part is to determine whether or not you're wasting your money. It doesn't make any difference. If I was in a perfect world, I'd go and partner up with a public health nursing program or a public health program at the university and have them do a study between apartments without similar size apartments with similar size number of people living in them, with and without the system, and then do a study of that. I think that would be probably something that they would be very interested in doing and publishing. But I don't know if that then makes it so complicated and cumbersome that you can't do the program. So that was one of my thoughts about it. Graham, you might give me your thoughts on that, or Vince.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that program would be in place by the time everyone's vaccinated at that point, right? Because we'd have to find the entity, and I think that'd be a big pill.
Yep. So I guess, we just, at some point, Phil, we just have to decide whether or not we're going to do something like this and just not have the satisfaction of having any kind of proof that it worked. And I think it's a small enough amount of money that's not onerous.
I have some comments.
Yeah, great, Michelle. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is just sort of off the top of my head. I'm just going to put them out there and then we can discuss them. So as I'm sort of writing down ideas. So first of all, we can't regulate the comings and goings of households. So if we were to buy this and put it in a household, we have no control over if that particular household is using all the other precautions along with it. Because per the EPA, and like Steve mentioned and someone else has mentioned, that filtration alone is not enough. And it has to be combined with best practices, but we can't regulate that. Okay, the next one. If we are unable to isolate, or if someone has COVID in a household and they are unable to isolate, how many units would have to be placed in a home to be effective, considering the square footage of the dwelling? And I understand we kind of discussed that a little bit. How many units would be needed per that household? The next one is there any other data besides what the EPA that shows that air filters are effective? And if you have multiple people coming in and out of a home, it may require multiple units, again, tying in to other comments. And before I go any further, I do want to say this is a nice idea, and it would, it could potentially be helpful to a family, but let me continue on. I just want to say, I don't want to seem heartless. The next one is, what would keep the recipients, like Phil said, what would keep the recipients from selling the units? If you've got to pay rent or you have to buy groceries, $500 unit, that'll buy a lot of groceries. And then how expensive are the replacement filters? Because if we're going to put these in the household, I imagine we're giving them this unit and not asking for it back. So they would have the unit. Now they're going to be charged with, not charged, but they would be tasked with buying replacement filters. So I don't know how often they would have to be replaced. If they've got 3, 4 families living in one household, I imagine not an apartment, but still, if you've got several people living in one area, it's going to have a heavy load coming in. So you're going to need to replace those filters a lot more often. If you're already cash strapped and those filters are $125, $50, $25 can make the difference whether someone has dinner that night or they need to have the filter. So are we going to be responsible for giving them replacement filters for as long as we have COVID? And that's pretty much it. I just kind of want to throw these things out, and whatever you want to come back on.
That's good points, Michelle. Thank you very much. Why don't we take a little break and ask Angela if we have any speaker cards?
So we do. We received 3 comments and then a couple miscellaneous comments. So I'll just read them at the end of these. But the first one is from Michelle Sweetman, and she writes, I'd like to say that to help small businesses at this time, we could really use some of the allocated funds for salons and gyms and restaurants that have been hit hard by this and have been closed the most. The last City of El Cajon grant, I was not awarded because my license renewal fee was late, as it was done online and I didn't receive notice. I've been in business in the City of El Cajon for 15 years and have never had a lapse in payment until this year. Needless to say, I received no grants at all for my struggling salon. Yet gas stations and businesses that weren't even shut down received them. I'm hoping some more of the funds can help the small business with forced closures, especially this time around. Thank you for listening. Next comment, Joe Alegria. Thank you to the City Council for taking Cajon Valley Union School District into consideration for this grant. Our student population is unique and diverse as compared to many school districts in the nation. In 2016, we at Cajon Valley were receiving up to nearly 200 students weekly coming in from the war-torn areas of the Middle East. Also, of nearly 17,000 students, 13,000 qualify for free and reduced lunch, most residing in the city of El Cajon. A gift of PPE supplies from the city of El Cajon would benefit our families. We are grateful for the consideration and whatever the decision. No, it will serve best for all. Thank you. Next comment from Carol Lewis. Thank you, Mayor Wells and council members. Happy holidays. My name is Carol Lewis. Thank you for looking at air filter systems to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We are thrilled that there are vaccines coming and that they will help reduce the spread of this terrible disease. I haven't seen any recommendations from the experts on purchasing air filter systems to reduce the spread, unless they are very expensive systems. They can do more than just recirculate the air in one room. The scientists and healthcare workers still recommend wearing masks, keeping a safe distance from others, and practicing frequent hand washing. I haven't seen any of these recommendations being encouraged from the city officials. Yesterday's event shown on the news had groups of people without masks and not practicing social distancing. Restaurants and businesses are being encouraged to open and people are not following these guidelines. It has been encouraged for homes to keep windows open and separate family members who are showing symptoms. Many of our households are multi-generational, and it is so important to protect our seniors and more vulnerable. Family members who are at parties, gatherings, and even shopping for the holidays are bringing the virus home. I encourage you to look at ways to educate the public, continue to assist with rental payments that are long overdue, provide motel vouchers and utility assistance during these challenging times. And we have two more comments from John Bailey. Homelessness, homelessness, homelessness. I own a home in this city, 2nd District, for the past 1.5 years, and I'm sick of the mentally deranged and drugged up homeless people wandering Main Street and the surrounding areas. I honestly have never seen such an eyesore in my entire 47 years on our planet. When people from outside the city pass through and see these people laying about with little shanty towns and shopping carts with their belongings in plain sight, they rightfully assume that no one cares about the city enough to clean it up. And if no one running the city does, why should they? El Cajon is a dirty word to other residents of San Diego County. Are you, as the city council members and the mayor, content with this? Clean this up. Do it like you're a proud resident of this city. Remember that the homeless coverage on this city because they know they can. And the last comment is from Stephanie Harper. I feel the need to bring this up once again because it is so vitally important to our community. If there is a need to register our children for school and make sure their address is within that district, isn't it just as important for us to do that for a council member? Even the attempt to deceive the public or the government shows their willingness not to play fair. So I would like to ask council if they would consider putting in a municipal code in our elections code that there be a residential prerequisite check to make sure that the people that are running for council live in that district. I believe that if we stand by and do nothing, the same problems will arise, and sooner than later, we're going to encounter that problem. I believe that this would be a job for our city attorney, who is more than qualified and more than capable of handling this issue. I would definitely like to hear more about this issue in the future city council meetings. And let's remember that honesty is always the best policy, especially in our government. We want El Cajon City to shine. That's the end of the comments, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Before we get started, I do think Stephanie Harper is correct on this, and Graham, I'd like to talk with you about what our options would be for that at another time.
I agree.
Okay, back to the questions. Steve, you said you wanted to answer some of those questions.
Well, I guess to continue the discussion of some of the other comments, a good question is, what does success look like?
Yeah.
Like with the CARES Act money used for motel vouchers, what does success look like when we use motel vouchers with CARES money? Presumably, you're using motel vouchers to isolate people from contracting the virus in places they might be, homeless or other things. So it is difficult to measure success with many of the things that we've already spent money on. If we were to issue PPE equipment, masks and things, how do we measure success? How do you measure success of a vaccine? A vaccine is a preventive measure. Fortunately, at the end of the study, you have results to say who caught it and who didn't catch it. In the same way, this is kind of like one of those PPE or vaccine things that at the end we would say of those that were issued these things, what was the rate of infection if we gave it as a preventive measure? Did anybody in the household contract it in an area that we know is one of the highest in the county for transmission? And we know higher density is catching it. We know households. So success would have to be a post look, just like vaccines, how many people caught it. And there's no guarantee with the vaccine. There's no guarantee with this. Is it a reasonable preventive measure? I guess is one of the questions. Could somebody sell these on the street? Of course, they could. They couldn't sell it for $500 because that's the street rate. That's the purchase rate. Would they sell it for $100 maybe? Would they actually go to do that? I don't know. It's a possibility. Filters, I understand that. Really kind of we're looking for a preventive measure for probably 1 to 5 months. Because I think really by June we're going to have herd immunity through vaccination. And so I kind of have a hunch the filter is going to last us 5 months. How do we get these out to people? Well, we know 88 people already who qualified, who got rental assistance. So certainly we could start with those 88 people. They've already been accepted. They've already received assistance. And would that help in their setting? Would they qualify? The Southern California Rental Housing Association has offered, with any of our CARES Act funding for low-income people, to get the word out. I don't know if we've used them as a resource yet, but they are the association which has the landlords of multifamily complexes in El Cajon. And that's a quick way to get word out to people. I guess looking at these questions here, how much to allocate? I think 50,000 is reasonable. It's grant money. It fulfills the purpose and the mission of the money. I would probably suggest preventive measures rather than those who have already tested positive. I kind of agree with the city manager that by the time you get one of these units to a household where somebody's already tested positive, by then whoever is in the household is going to get it or not get it. So it's probably too late in that. But a preventive measure, I think that has some things. Should the city measure the program's success, and if so, how? Yes. Did you get COVID? Did anybody in your house get COVID after using the filtration system? Again, that's kind of murky because we don't know, is it an automatic system that that just does it automatically? Do they have to do anything? Do they turn it off? Do they turn it on? In our home, we have a system for 800 square feet, and it is automatic. And we've had it since April, and it tells us when to change the filter. So with 4 occupants, we haven't had to change the filter yet. But here's an important one. Should the program be limited to those living in an apartment or specific size home? I think yes. And here's why. It's the density that's the issue. If you live in a large home, you have the ability to go down to the end of the hall into your bedroom, you perhaps using a separate bathroom. A 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house is different than a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. So I guess I am kind of looking at perhaps 1,000 square feet or less, whether that's an apartment or a single-family home. And I think that's probably a key that we haven't talked about yet, is the size of the unit. I think that's probably where the density and the affection is happening more so than other places. Those are my comments.
More comments from the council?
A question for the staff. How long before the people at high risk will be vaccinated?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the federal government, I think the goal is to have a big chunk of the population, at least the vulnerable members of the population, within the next few months. So, or at least by the next 6 months. So,
one thing that I'm concerned about is that, the money, when we use money, it has to come from somewhere. And I'm concerned that when the rent moratorium is over, there are going to be a lot of evictions. And I really want to keep families from living in the bushes. And not only do we help the families, we also help the landlords keep the properties. So, and we're sure that's effective because it keeps them from getting evicted. And I think being in a motel room, emergency motel room, is safer than, again, the family living in the bushes. And we're going to see a huge upsurge when the moratorium is lifted. There are people that haven't paid rent since March. And that's, that's going to really affect the economy and the quality of lives. And to me, housing has to be kind of number one. You got to keep people safe. And I think that a lot of people that are high risk will probably be vaccinated by March, and then the rest of the population later on. So I think the biggest bang for the buck is keeping people in their homes, or at least in the motel situation, keeping a roof over their heads. And this is, women and children, and a lot of newcomers that just don't understand how things work in the United States. And I think we need to, as someone said, advertise the fact that this money is available. We can even, I think we can buy mailing lists of people within the city of El Cajon where the unlawful detainer has been filed. In fact, once you get an unlawful detainer in your record, it's almost impossible to rent an apartment building because the internet, the landlord can check right away. And not only does it ruin their credit, it ruins their ability to find another place to live. So my number one concern is keeping people housed.
Mr. Mayor, both Mr. Goebel and Mr. Kendrick talked about getting the word out of our current program. I just wanted the council to know that we sent out an email to every restaurant owner on Friday, letting them know about our program, that they could pass this information along to their employees, because we know those are some vulnerable members of our community. And then a letter is actually going out today. It's been approved, and it will be going out to both the PSAR and also to the San Diego Apartment Association, and it will actually include flyers that they can photocopy or email to their tenants. So they'll give it to their membership and they can send it to their tenants to get the word out on the street. So we recognize that social media posts and press releases is not the direct marketing that we need. We need a little bit more surgical approach. So we're taking those right now.
Yeah, I think Steve's suggestion of using the apartment association is probably a good one.
Yeah. So we're working on that right now.
You know, to a question for Gary, we still have $200,000 unclaimed from the first round. We have over $600,000 unallocated from this round. We're probably going to get more from legislation that's probably going to be signed today. So anybody who wants money could have received money at this point.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the people that haven't received a notice of eviction don't know about it. We have a lot of people, newcomers, that aren't very sophisticated in how things work in the United States. A lot of them are, don't speak English. So I think the flood is going to be coming probably in March of all the evictions.
Or comments from other council members?
This is a question for staff. I know we did the round of business grants. Does this current CBDG money that we have allow for more business grants, or?
They do not. They're expressly limited to low-income individuals. Now, if a business can qualify, then they could seek assistance for rental or mortgage assistance, but not from a business loan or grant.
Got it. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
So, how effective or not effective? I know the county has a different pot of money that they're giving for rental assistance, correct?
Yeah, there's many governments at different levels do have these funds.
Okay, so the county has been really, really slow in getting out money for people who applied back in September. And I was just able to help one of the citizens with that, and she's the money for her rental assistant is finally being mailed out on Monday. Now, this is over 3 months that she has been struggling and waiting for money to come from the county. Is it possible that we have somewhat of a backlog for Home Start or some of the other entities who are distributing that money? And that's why that money has not been distributed yet.
Well, so as you recall, or the council may recall, we had 3 different vendors that were helping us. And the reality is one vendor was really good and the other 2 not as good. So we'll be shifting money from the other 2 into Home Start. So we think that will help speed up the flow. The council also gave our vendors a larger allocation of admin money. And just so you know, the city of La Mesa used its CARES Act money and actually hired a person that exclusive for Home Start. So Home Start hired somebody with La Mesa's money so they could actually process things quicker. So we are a bit hamstrung because we have been frugal on our admin money because we want money to get to individuals. The challenge, though, is when you do that, you do limit the ability to get the money out. So that is a bit of the balancing act. I wouldn't recommend we change the course right now until we see how well Home Start can perform. They have the additional admin money. We're giving them the additional funding, and we're focusing on a more, precise way of getting the marketing of the program to people that really need it. So I wouldn't make any changes yet. Let's see how this goes over the next month or 2 before any big changes occur.
Okay, thank you.
I guess my final thought is, we don't have data to show effectiveness, and I know it's a tool. Ultimately, it's still taxpayer money, and, like Gary's saying, there's probably going to be a flood of people requesting rental assistance, and I like making good decisions based off of good data, and kind of feels like we don't have a good definition of success, and there's a lot of risk to just hand out, filtration systems. I'm very hesitant about implementing a program like this.
Mayor, we received one more comment with your permission. I can read it. It's from Vicky Lux. She is asking who will pay the increase in the San Diego gas and electric bill if these are implemented.
Good point.
So council, remember the rental and mortgage assistance program also includes a utility assistance program. So again, those households that are qualified can seek assistance to pay utilities, and that's more than just gas and electric. That it includes trash, it includes sewer, it includes water, includes just a wide variety of those utilities.
Okay, I think everybody's had a chance to discuss everything. If there's anybody else would like to offer up some final comments, I think we should go ahead and consider a motion. Any final comments?
Yeah, it was my idea, so I'm going to put out the best persuasive argument I can. I'm trying to help low-income people in a high-density area where the rate of infection is one of the highest in the county. I'll say it again. I'm trying to help low-income people in one of the highest rates of infection in the county. Is it a perfect program? No. But I'll fight for a low-income person who can't afford something, who lives in a household that's small where the rate of infection, 39% of the people got from a household member. I'll fight for them. I'm going to vote for this. But I understand your concerns about the use of taxpayer dollars. I'm going to fight for them. I'm going to move that we approve a program for $50,000. Staff will determine the number of units. My motion is that it apply to people living in units of 1,000 square feet or less. That Home Start measures at the end of May 31st, how many people using these units caught COVID. If these go to pre-COVID-19 households, and that we give low-income people a chance to be COVID-free in their house. That's my motion.
Before this, I ask for a second. I'd like to discuss the possibility of a substitute motion because I don't think this is going to pass. And I'm going to ask staff, would more time give you the opportunity to research this in depth to see what the efficacy of a program like this might be? Or have you already exhausted that?
Remember, if council gives direction today, we can't really take any action until January 12th, right? So, but we knew that if there was questions, if we had the conversation on January 12th and then we got information back, now we're really pushing into February and at some point March, right? So that was the rationale for talking now. So we can do research. I don't know what's out there. I know I've scoured the CDC websites and the EPA websites.
Okay.
I haven't polled other city managers across the country about this. I mean, that's another option.
It seems like you've done the basic research.
We have done the basic research.
All right. Well, then there's a motion on the table. And would somebody would like to make a second? All right. For lack of a second, I think the issue is closed.
Okay, well, I appreciate my colleagues' time in considering this. And you don't win them all.
Steve, it's not a
Sorry, Steve.
bad idea. I just think it's there's competing factors, and I think we should be all thinking about and working on how to best help people that are suffering in this situation. probably the most oppressive situation that's happened in my lifetime, and we need to help people. We need to do everything we can to help people. So I appreciate everybody's thorough consideration of the resources that we have and how to help people the best. Okay. If there are no more comments, any more comments? This brings us to the adjournment. The joint special meeting of the Elkhorn City Council and Elkhorn Housing Authority held this 22nd day of December 2020 is adjourned until Tuesday, January 12th, 2020 at 3 o'clock p.m. And I hope that everybody has a happy holiday, happy Christmas.